Okay? So it's 6:47. You closed your laptop, 20 minutes ago? And you're standing in the kitchen holding a spoon. You don't know why you have the spoon. And if I asked you right now what happened in those 20 minutes, you couldn't tell me. You were just not there. In the room, technically. But your mind is elsewhere. I used to think that was tiredness. It's not. What's actually happening to you has a name. Most people treat focus like a moral virtue. They treat it like a tax. Over the next 20 minutes, I'm going to show you where that tax is secretly costing you, and 3 one-minute systems to shut it down. Marcus Aurelius kept a private journal, never meant for publication, and there's one realization he returns to constantly. Left unguarded, the mind will wander into everyone else's business before it ever attends to its own. He wasn't dealing with an inbox, but if he saw a modern phone screen, he'd recognize the trap instantly. Conventional focus advice frames this as a moral failing. Guard your mind. Be more disciplined. As if picking up your phone 40 times a day is just a weakness of character. I don't buy that. Attention isn't a moral virtue. It's a financial budget. Every single interruption makes a withdrawal, whether you engage with it or not. When a Slack notification pops up and you simply glance at it, the transaction is already complete. The noticing is the cost. Responding is optional. Paying the tax isn't. Which means the goal was never willpower. It's reducing withdrawals before resistance is even required. That's not a character flaw. It's a systems problem. And a systems problem is something you can actually fix on a random Tuesday. Willpower isn't. Most modern environments aren't neutral about your focus. Notifications are on by default, open offices trade quiet depth for constant access, and calendars are filled because visibility gets confused with value. Nobody is coming to fix your environment for you. That part is entirely on you. Now, I can hear the objection already, because I've made it myself. That's nice, but my job actually requires me to be reachable. I can't just put my phone in a drawer. My manager pings me, clients ping me. If I miss something for 2 hours, that's an actual problem, not a hypothetical one. That's fair. I'm not going to tell you that's not true, because for a lot of jobs, it is. But here's what I've noticed when I actually look closely at that objection. Almost nobody needs to be reachable every single minute. They need to be reachable within some window, 15 minutes, 30, an hour, depending on the role. The problem is, most of us default to a window of 0 because reacting immediately feels responsible. And nobody's ever told you the actual acceptable window is longer than that. So the depth you're carving out doesn't have to mean total disappearance. It can mean checking in once, briefly, on your terms, instead of 40 times on someone else's. That's still a real reduction, even if it's not the clean version. You don't need the ideal system. You need a better one than what you're running now. And if your job genuinely requires true, constant, second-by-second availability, if that's actually the shape of the role and not just the anxiety talking, then some of what's coming later about closing loops and where your attention actually goes in between the interruptions is going to matter more to you, not less. You can't control the interruptions. You can still control what happens to your attention in the gaps. Most of us leave only one unlocked door between ourselves and distraction. The phone sits screen up on the desk. Slack stays open in a tab. Trying to put a stronger lock on that door through sheer willpower doesn't work. You'll just override it on autopilot. You need a second door, not a vault, but a layer of physical friction that forces you to stop and choose. Place your phone in a drawer. Not because a drawer is some kind of vault. You can open a drawer in about 1 second. That's not the point. The point is that 1 second of friction is enough to interrupt the reflex. You have to stop and choose. Choosing on purpose happens far less often than reaching by default. Seneca observed that we inevitably resemble those we keep nearby. The same is true of objects. You become whatever sits within arm's reach, because proximity dictates behavior. So try this tomorrow and keep it small. One task that actually needs depth, and before you start, put one object of friction between you and the phone. Another room, a drawer, a bag on the other side of the desk, whatever works. Then just watch yourself. Count how many times you go get it anyway. Don't feel bad about the number. Just notice it. It's telling you something true about where you're actually starting from, not where you wish you were. Okay, so remember at the start, the thing with the spoon standing in the kitchen not knowing where the last 20 minutes went. There's an actual name for that, and it's not as mystical as it sounds. Researchers call it attention residue. Sophie Leroy's done some of the clearest work on it. When you leave a task before it's done, some part of your brain doesn't fully leave with you. It stays back, half finishing it. Your performance on whatever you do next takes an immediate hit and keeps taking a hit until that first task either gets actually finished or gets closed off in your head on purpose. Attention residue isn't caused by unfinished work. It's caused by work left unfinished without a clear boundary. When your brain doesn't know when it can safely let go, it continues holding the load. Multitasking fails, not because doing two things is impossible, but because ending things poorly is expensive. Try this at your next task transition. Take 15 seconds to complete a single mental sentence. I am leaving this project at X, and I will pick it back up on Y at Z time. You aren't doing time management. You are shutting a door that would otherwise swing open in the wind. Marcus Aurelius managed an empire one closed loop at a time, because that is the only unit a human mind can reliably hold. The most expensive distraction has nothing to do with your phone. It's the voice playing underneath your work, replaying what you should have said in the last meeting, or drafting a reply to an email you haven't fully read. Epictetus has this line: "It's not what happens to you. It's the story you tell yourself about what happened that does the damage." I used to think that was just a nice sentiment, but the meeting itself isn't what's draining you. It's the running commentary underneath it, the second track playing in your head that nobody asked you to record. And it just plays anyway. That voice isn't out to get you. It's simply experiencing emotional attention residue. An unresolved tension with a colleague doesn't just cost the 10 minutes you spent discussing it. It costs the next 30 minutes while your brain compulsively circles back to check if the situation is safe. You can't really tell that voice to be quiet. It doesn't listen to reason. But you can give it somewhere to put the thought down instead of carrying it around all day. Write down a single line. Follow up regarding X by Friday. Once a thought has an address outside your head, most of the circling just stops. The problem isn't solved, but your mind is no longer forced to hold the coordinates. Marcus Aurelius famously noted, "What stands in the way becomes the way." And I think it gets flattened over the years into something like, turn your problems into motivation. But that's not useful at 11 at night when something's actually gone wrong. Here's a version of it I actually use. Friction isn't really an obstacle to your focus. It's information. It's telling you where your plan and reality disagree. When a task takes 3 times longer than expected, frustration is just noise. The real message is the gap between expectation and reality. Your plan assumes something the world had already disproved. Most people respond to friction by pushing harder in the same direction, working later and gripping tighter. But friction usually signals that direction needs to change, not effort. When progress stalls, stop asking, "Why is this happening?" That question yields a mood, not an answer. Ask instead, "What did I not know when I planned this?" That one actually has an answer. And answerable questions are really the only kind that move you anywhere. The other kind just tires you out and calls it effort. Willpower's a bad long-term plan, if I'm honest, because it moves around depending on how you slept, what you ate, how the last meeting went. Ritual doesn't ask your willpower for anything, which is sort of the whole appeal. It bypasses internal negotiation entirely. Epictetus talked about deciding ahead of time who you intend to be, so that in the actual moment you're not negotiating with yourself, you are simply executing a choice made when your head was clear. That's all a ritual is, a decision made once in advance, so you don't have to remake it every day at your weakest hour. You don't need 5 new rituals, you need one, small enough that skipping it would feel stranger than doing it. Something like, before you open your email, one sentence written down about what actually matters today. Not a list, one sentence. That smallness is basically the whole design. A ritual that needs motivation to keep going isn't really a ritual. It's a goal in disguise. Build it for your worst, most exhausted nights. The good days take care of themselves. Everything so far has been about today. The spoon in the kitchen, the meeting you didn't quite hear, tonight's one sentence before email. And that's on purpose, because today's the only place you can actually do anything. But I want to be honest with you about what happens if none of this changes, because I don't think the real cost is about today at all. The tax doesn't show up as a bad day. It shows up 8 months from now as the strategic idea you never quite had, because the 2 hours where it might have surfaced got cut into 6-minute pieces by things that felt urgent and mostly weren't. It shows up as the promotion that went to someone who seemed sharper in the room, not because they're smarter than you, but because they weren't still processing 3 other things while the conversation was happening. Nobody hands you a bill for this. There's no line item that says, "Cost of fragmented attention, 3rd quarter." It just quietly narrows what you're capable of noticing, which narrows what you're capable of becoming, and you don't feel it happening because each individual day looks basically fine. I think that's actually the scariest part, not that the tax is high, that it's invisible enough to pay for years without ever looking at the total. Seneca actually did something most people don't know about. Every night before he slept, he asked himself a short set of questions about the day. Not to punish himself, he was pretty explicit about that. No anger in it, no beating yourself up, just an honest accounting. What did I do today that I'm glad about? What habit did I push back against? What could I have handled better, and how? Specifically, next time. I think it works so well at night because it's the one moment in your day when nothing's actually asking anything of you anymore. No notifications coming, no meetings starting in 4 minutes. It's just you and whatever the day actually was, instead of whatever you were too busy to notice about it. So here's a version of that you can actually do, and it takes maybe 90 seconds. 3 questions in order. Where did my attention go today that I didn't choose? Where did I close a loop instead of leaving it hanging? And this one's the important one. Is there one thing tomorrow where I already know I'll be tempted to leave the second door unlocked? That last question matters more than it sounds like it should, because it means tomorrow's discipline isn't happening tomorrow, under pressure, when you're tired and the meeting's already started. It's happening right now, tonight, when you've got the clearest head you're going to have until you wake up. You're not hoping future you handles it. You're deciding something tonight that future you just has to execute. That's really the whole shape of everything we've talked about. Not more willpower. Just deciding things earlier, when deciding is cheap, instead of later, when it's expensive. Seneca physically conditioned himself not for aesthetics, but because he understood an essential truth. The mind cannot operate independently of the body. A nervous system on high alert, strained by back-to-back calls and lunch eaten one-handed at a keyboard, cannot produce calm, focused attention on command. There is a physical floor to how focused you can be, and no framework gets you underneath it. You don't need an elaborate wellness routine. You need one 90-second gap today between tasks, without a phone, without previewing what comes next, just a breath and a window with nothing in it. That isn't a break from productivity. It is the maintenance productivity depends on. Marcus Aurelius frequently referred to the mind as a fortress, what modern scholars call the inner citadel. His point was simple. External events can invade your day, disrupt your schedule, and demand your time. But they can never force their way into your mind unless you grant them access. The world outside can be chaotic, but the sanctuary within remains entirely under your command. Most of us treat our minds like a house with the front door thrown wide open. Every notification, every minor emergency, every offhand comment from a colleague walks right in, sets up camp, and dictates how we feel for the next 3 hours. We yield our peace without asking for identification. The Stoic approach isn't to stop the world from knocking. You can't. It's to build a boundary at the gate. Before you let an interruption derail your entire afternoon, pause and ask, does this belong inside the citadel, or is it just noise at the gate? You don't have to control the chaotic weather outside your fortress. You only need to decide what gets brought through the front door. So, back to the tax thing, since that's where we started. You can't get yourself untaxed. Nobody's shutting down the notification economy on your behalf anytime soon. But a tax you actually understand is one you can plan around, and most people are just paying it blind. 41 withdrawals a day, and then 6 p.m. rolls around feeling like nothing happened, even though nothing really stopped either. You don't need to become a more disciplined person tonight. You need one door moved a little further away, one loop closed on purpose instead of left hanging, one sentence written down instead of carried around all evening. That's closer to an audit than a transformation, honestly. Unglamorous, I know. But audits are kind of the only thing that's ever actually changed what something costs you. Let's make this concrete for a second, because ideas are cheap at midnight, and they're cheap in the morning too, if you don't attach them to an actual hour. Tomorrow, somewhere around 9, you sit down to do the one thing that actually needs your whole brain. Before you do, the phone goes in the drawer, not gone, just one door further away than it was yesterday. That's the only decision. Everything else that hour just happens on its own. Around 11, you're in back-to-back calls the way you always are. Between the first and the second, you take the 15 seconds where you're leaving it, where you're picking it back up. Nobody in the room even notices you did it. That's kind of the point. The whole thing is invisible from the outside, which is exactly why it works. It's not a performance for anyone else. It's just you, quietly not leaving residue behind you all day. Somewhere in the afternoon, something's going to stall. It always does. And instead of just pushing harder, you ask what you didn't know when you planned it. Maybe there's an answer. Maybe the answer means the task moves to tomorrow, and that's fine. That's not failure. That's just accurate information arriving a little late. And tonight, however tonight goes, you close it out. 90 seconds. Where did your attention go that you didn't choose? What loop got closed instead of left hanging? What's tomorrow's unlocked door? None of that is a program you sign up for. It's just Tuesday, done slightly differently than the Tuesday before it. And a year of slightly different Tuesdays is really the only kind of transformation that was ever available to any of us. Not the dramatic kind, the compounding kind. That's tonight's episode. If any part of it followed you into tomorrow, that was kind of the point.